My name is Olivia Chen, and for 7 years my parents removed me from every family portrait because my lack of success embarrassed them. They deleted me from holiday cards, cropped me out of reunion photos, and asked me to take the picture at gatherings. Then my novel topped the New York Times bestseller list, and suddenly, they wanted me front and center in every shot. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, success, and self-worth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing the final proofs for my second novel. Family dinner this Saturday at 7. Mom's making your favorite coconut curry. Important news to share. Please come. Dad? I stared at my laptop screen, feeling that familiar tension crawl up my spine. Family dinners were rarely just family dinners, especially when my father specified important news. The last important news had been my younger sister Emma's engagement to a cardiothoracic surgeon, an announcement that had prompted my mother to comment pointedly about finally having something to brag about at the neighborhood potluck. My name is Olivia Chen, and for the past 3 years, I've been writing under the pen name O.J. Winters. While many published authors complain about deadlines and demanding editors, I thrive under pressure. There's something deeply satisfying about crafting worlds out of nothing but imagination and discipline, watching characters take shape on the page like clay beneath a sculptor's hands. My modest 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago isn't extravagant, but the bay window in my writing nook offers a perfect view of Lake Michigan. On clear mornings, I watch the sunrise paint the water gold while I draft new chapters, a ritual that has produced 2 completed novels and a collection of short stories. My debut novel, The Winter Station, had been published 6 months ago to critical acclaim, though my family remained unaware that O.J. Winters and Olivia Chen were one and the same. The decision to use a pen name hadn't been about hiding my success from my family, at least not initially. When my agent suggested it, the reasoning had been simple. Gender-neutral names often performed better in literary fiction, particularly with certain demographics. But as publication approached, I found myself reluctant to share the news with my parents and siblings. After years of subtle and not-so-subtle dismissal of my writing as a hobby and suggestions to get a real job, I wasn't prepared for their inevitable lack of enthusiasm. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad said he emailed you about Saturday. You're coming, right? Everyone will be there. Emma and my brother Daniel were both younger than me. Emma by 3 years, Daniel by 5. While I had put myself through state college with scholarships and part-time jobs, they had attended prestigious private universities fully funded by our parents. Where I had been told to be practical and independent, they had been encouraged to follow their passions with generous safety nets beneath them. Emma was now planning an extravagant wedding to her surgeon fiancé, while Daniel had just been made junior partner at our father's investment firm after just 4 years, a meteoric rise even my mother admitted had been helped along by family connections. I typed a quick response. I'll be there. Setting. My phone aside, I returned to the proofs of The Silent Season, my second novel scheduled for release in 3 months. The story followed a young woman uncovering family secrets after inheriting a remote house in northern Michigan, fiction that drew uncomfortably from my own experiences of family dynamics and unspoken expectations. Later that evening, as I was making final edits on Chapter 12, my phone rang. It was Daniel. Liv, you're coming Saturday, right? His voice held that artificial enthusiasm he reserved for family obligations. Mom's been planning all week. Yes, Daniel. I already told Emma I'd be there. Great. Hey, wear something nice, okay? Dad's invited the Richardsons, too. The mention of the Richardsons raised my suspicions further. James and Patricia Richardson were old friends of my parents and prominent figures in Chicago's social scene. Their presence suggested this dinner had a performative element, something my parents excelled at. "Is there something specific being celebrated?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Just be there at 7, Daniel replied, neatly sidestepping my question. "And maybe wear that blue dress you had at Christmas? The one that doesn't make you look like you're attending a funeral?" After we hung up, I stared out at the darkening lake, watching lights from boats glitter against the water. 4 years ago, fresh out of my MFA program and working as a copywriter to pay the bills, I'd made the mistake of mentioning my novel in progress at a family dinner. My father had chuckled and said, "Everyone thinks they can write a book," while my mother had gently suggested that perhaps I should focus on building a real career first. Only my grandmother Lynn had shown genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about my characters and plot. She'd been a literature professor before retiring and understood the passion that drove me. "Never let anyone dim your light," she'd told me privately that night. "Success isn't measured by how loudly others applaud." Grandmother Lynn had passed away 18 months ago, never seeing my work in print. Among her possessions had been a folder containing every story I'd ever shared with her, from childhood fairy tales to college literary magazine publications. She'd labeled it simply, "Olivia's Brilliance." Over the following days, I immersed myself in final revisions, emerging only for necessary coffee replenishment and brief walks along the lakefront to clear my head. By Friday evening, I had completed my work and sent the proofs back to my editor with a sense of deep satisfaction. As I prepared dinner that night, my phone lit up with a notification. A message from my agent, Caroline. "Great news! Early numbers for Winter Station just came in. We've hit the NYT list at number 3. They want an interview next week. Call me ASAP." I stood frozen in my kitchen, wooden spoon dripping tomato sauce onto the floor. The New York Times bestseller list. The achievement every writer dreams of, but few actually achieve. My hands trembled as I called Caroline back, listening in disbelief as she confirmed the news and outlined the publicity opportunities now opening. Up. "They want a photo for the interview," she mentioned toward the end of our call. "I know you've been private about your identity, but this would significantly boost your profile." I hesitated, thinking about tomorrow's family dinner. About the important news awaiting me. About years of being positioned as the underachieving child, the one who couldn't quite measure up to family expectations. "I'll think about it," I told her. "Can I let you know on Monday?" After we hung up, I opened my laptop and pulled up the family photos from last Christmas. The official ones my mother had shared on social media, and the candid ones my cousin had sent me privately. In the official portraits, I was notably absent, having been assigned to take the photos by my mother. In the candids, I appeared at the edges, slightly separate from the core family group, my presence tolerated rather than celebrated. The pattern had begun 7 years ago, shortly after I'd declined a position at my father's firm to pursue writing. Initially subtle, being positioned behind taller relatives, or asked to take just one shot that turned into all of them, it had become increasingly blatant. Last Thanksgiving, my mother had actually said, "Olivia, you stand aside. This is for the holiday card, and we want to feature Emma's engagement and Daniel's promotion." Standing in my apartment, bestseller news still ringing in my ears, I made a decision. I opened my closet and selected my outfit for tomorrow's dinner. Not the conservative blue dress Daniel had suggested, but a striking emerald jumpsuit I'd bought to wear to my first book signing event and never shown my family. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth for April. I spent the morning answering congratulatory emails from my publisher and drafting social media announcements that would coincide with the official bestseller list release. At 5:30, I changed into my emerald jumpsuit, applied makeup more suited to an author photo than a family dinner, and headed to my parents' North Shore estate. Their house was a sprawling colonial that my father had purchased when his investment firm first took off. I'd grown up in its perfectly appointed rooms, learning early that appearances mattered above all else in the Chen family. Success wasn't merely encouraged, it was expected, with very specific definitions of what counted as achievement. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noted Emma's Lexus and Daniel's Tesla already parked in front. The Richardsons' Mercedes was there too, confirming my suspicion that this dinner was more performance than family gathering. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my handbag and approached the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal my mother, Catherine Chen, dressed impeccably as always in a designer dress, her smile tightening slightly when she saw my outfit. "Olivia, darling, you're here. Everyone's in the living room." Her eyes flicked over my jumpsuit again. "That's certainly colorful." I stepped into the house that had once been my home, feeling like a visitor in a museum dedicated to appearance and achievement, wondering what important news awaited me and whether I would finally share my own. Little did I know that this dinner would force me to confront not just my family's perceptions, but my own understanding of success, visibility, and the price of recognition. The scent of my mother's coconut curry permeated the air, a reminder of childhood Sunday dinners when meals weren't orchestrated photo opportunities. I followed my mother through the marble foyer, past the formal dining room where the table was already set with the Wedgwood china, the set reserved for guests worth impressing. In the living room, my father stood by the fireplace, deep in conversation, with James Richardson. At 62, Edward Chen still cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the confident posture of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. He was gesturing animatedly about something, likely market trends or property values, while James nodded with practiced interest. Emma and her fiancé, Dr. Anthony Park, sat together on the cream leather sofa, her hand conspicuously placed on his arm to display her 3-carat diamond engagement ring. Daniel was showing Patricia Richardson something on his tablet, likely portfolio projections or vacation photos from his recent trip to the Maldives. "Olivia's here," my mother announced, and the room shifted subtly. Conversations paused, heads turned, eyes assessed. My father broke into a practiced smile. "There's my oldest," he said, setting down his whiskey tumbler. "We were beginning to think you'd gotten caught up in one of your stories again." "I'm right on time, Dad," I replied, accepting his brief hug. "The curry smells amazing." "Your mother outdid herself," he said with a meaningful glance toward the Richardsons. "Special occasion calls for a special meal." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I made my rounds, polite greetings to the Richardsons, a kiss on the cheek for Emma, congratulations to Anthony on a recent surgical breakthrough that had been featured in the Tribune, and a brief hug for Daniel. My siblings had always been a united front, 3 years apart in age, but joined by their shared status as the family success stories. "Interesting outfit choice," Emma commented, her tone suggesting she'd expected me to follow Daniel's wardrobe. Advice. "Very creative." "Thanks," I replied simply, offering no explanation or apology for not wearing the suggested blue dress. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly at my lack of defensiveness, a small disruption in our usual dynamic. "Can I get you a drink?" my father asked, already moving toward the bar cart. "I have that Pinot Noir you like." "That would be great, thanks." As he poured my wine, I took the opportunity to survey the room more carefully. The mantel displayed a collection of family photos: Emma's graduation from Northwestern, Daniel receiving a business award, my parents at charity galas. I wasn't surprised to notice my absence in all of them. On the side table stood a framed copy of last year's holiday card. My parents, Emma, Anthony, and Daniel, arranged in a perfect family tableau in front of the Christmas tree I had helped decorate, but wasn't allowed to stand near when the photographer arrived. "So, Olivia, James Richardson boomed, clearly assigned small talk duty with the less impressive daughter. Catherine tells me you're still working in. What was it again? Advertising? Copywriting, I corrected, accepting my wine from my father. Though I've transitioned to more creative projects recently. Following your bliss. He nodded with the condescending approval of someone who'd never had to worry about making rent. Brave choice in today's economy. Risk and reward, I replied with a slight smile. Some gambles pay off better than others. My mother, detecting potential deviation from acceptable dinner conversation, quickly announced that we should move to the dining room. We migrated to the immaculately set table where the curry steamed fragrantly in the center, surrounded by perfectly arranged side dishes. "This looks incredible, Catherine," Patricia exclaimed, taking her designated seat beside James. "Just a simple family recipe," my mother demurred, though we all knew her version of coconut curry contained ingredients flown in from 3 different countries. As we settled into our seats, I found myself between Anthony and Patricia, directly across from my father at the head of the table. The seating arrangement felt deliberate, placing me among the guests rather than with immediate family, a subtle reinforcement of my peripheral status. "Before we begin," my father said, raising his glass, "I'd like to propose a toast." We all lifted our glasses, the expectation in the room almost palpable. "To family," he said, his gaze sweeping the table before settling on Emma and Daniel, with particular pride. "And to the future of Chen Investments." The connection between those 2 toasts sent a ripple of understanding through me. This was about the family business, the altar at which we had all been expected to worship since childhood. Dinner proceeded with the usual family dynamics. My father dominated the conversation, moving from financial markets to local politics, with authoritative opinions on everything. My mother played the perfect hostess, ensuring glasses remained filled and serving dishes circulated. Emma and Anthony shared tasteful anecdotes about hospital politics and wedding plans, while Daniel occasionally interjected with business insights that earned approving nods from our father. I answered questions when directly addressed, noticing how quickly conversation moved on from any topic I introduced. When I mentioned a writers' conference I'd attended, my mother immediately redirected to Emma's recent charity gala appearance. When I complimented the spice balance in the curry, my father launched into a story about a restaurant he'd visited in Bangkok with Daniel on a business trip. It wasn't until dessert, my mother's panna cotta with mango coulis, that my father finally cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. "I'm sure you're all wondering why we've gathered for this special dinner," he began, setting down his dessert spoon with deliberate precision. The table fell silent, all attention focused on him. Even Emma set aside her constant phone checking. "As some of you already know, I've been considering the future of Chen Investments for some time now," my father continued. "We've built something remarkable over 35 years, a legacy I'm deeply proud of." James Richardson nodded solemnly across the table. "As we look toward the next chapter, I've been thinking about succession planning and ensuring that what we've built continues to grow with the next generation," my father said, his gaze moving between Emma and Daniel before conspicuously skipping over me. My stomach tightened. I'd seen this coming from the moment I received my father's email, yet watching it unfold still sent a chill through me. "To that end," he continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Daniel will be promoted to senior partner effective next month, with a path to becoming CEO when I step back in 5 years." Polite applause circled the table as Daniel accepted congratulations with practiced humility. "Additionally," my father said, his voice taking on a formal quality that signaled the real purpose of this gathering, "we're creating a new position of Director of Client Relations, which Emma will assume after her wedding in September." More applause, more congratulations. Emma beamed while Anthony squeezed her hand proudly. "While Emma's background is in art history rather than finance, my father continued with a chuckle that prompted knowing smiles around the table. Her natural charm and social connections make her perfect for cultivating our high-net-worth client relationships. I maintained a polite smile, unsurprised by these announcements. The Chen family business had always been the presumed destination for my siblings, regardless of qualifications or interest. What did surprise me was my father's next statement. As we embark on this new chapter, we'll be launching a significant rebranding campaign, he said, turning toward the Richardsons, which is why we've invited James and Patricia to join us tonight. Their marketing firm will be handling the publicity, including a major feature in Business Insider about family legacy and succession. My father's gaze finally landed on me, with an expression I recognized as his reasonable businessman look. We'll be doing a comprehensive photo shoot for the campaign next month, all of us together, representing the Chen family legacy. I'll need you to clear your schedule for May 15th, Olivia. The table went quiet, attention shifting uncomfortably to me. After 7 years of being systematically excluded from family imagery, I was suddenly being instructed, to participate in a corporate branding exercise. I see, I said, keeping my voice steady. May I ask why I'm being included? In the company photos when I've never worked for Chen Investments? My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Olivia, she said with forced lightness, this is about family, not just business. Is it? I asked quietly. Because the family photos taken in this house for the past 7 years would suggest otherwise. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emma and Daniel exchanged glances, while the Richardsons suddenly became very interested in their desserts. That's different, my father said dismissively. Those were casual, family moments. This is about our public image, our legacy. So I'm excluded from the family narrative but included in the corporate brand when it's convenient, I clarified, still maintaining a calm tone. I'm trying to understand the distinction. My mother's face flushed. Don't be dramatic, Olivia. No one excluded you from anything. You chose to pursue your writing instead of joining the family business. We respected your decision. Did you? I asked, thinking of holiday cards where I'd been relegated to photographer, family reunions where I'd been positioned behind taller relatives or cropped out entirely, social media posts where my accomplishments went unmentioned while Emma's charity luncheons and Daniel's golf tournaments were celebrated extensively. This isn't the time or place for this discussion, my father said, glancing apologetically at the Richardsons. We can talk about your feelings later. For now, I need to know if you'll be available on May 15th for the photo shoot. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, my father's impatience, my mother's embarrassment, Emma's discomfort, Daniel's studied neutrality. Then I thought about Caroline's call, about The Winter Station reaching number 3 on the bestseller list, about the New York Times interview scheduled for next week. Actually, I said carefully, setting down my napkin, I may have a scheduling conflict on the 15th. I have my own professional commitments to consider. My father's eyebrows rose. What commitments could possibly take precedence over a family obligation of this importance? The question hung in the air, loaded with 7 years of dismissal and underestimation. In that moment, looking at my family assembled around the table, a tableau of success as narrowly defined by Edward Chen, I made a decision. I've been published, I said simply. My novel came out 6 months ago. It just hit the New York Times bestseller list at number 3. The silence that followed was absolute. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me in varying states of disbelief. You published a book? My mother finally managed, her voice faint. A real book? With a publisher? Yes, under the pen name O.J. Winters. I took a sip of water, watching recognition dawn on Patricia Richardson's face. Wait, she said slowly. The Winter Station? That's you? My book club just read that last month. It was extraordinary. My father was still processing, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like concern. "Why didn't you tell us?" he demanded. "Why would I?" I asked gently. "When have any of my writing aspirations been met with anything but dismissal or condescension?" "That's not fair," Emma interjected. "We've always supported you." "Have you?" I countered. "When I mentioned working on a novel 4 years ago, Dad laughed and said everyone thinks they can write a book. Mom suggested I focus on a real career first." "You asked if I was still doing that writing thing at Christmas last year, Emma. Not one of you has ever asked to read anything I've written." Daniel, surprisingly, was the first to recover. "Bestseller list," he repeated slowly. "That's legitimate. How many copies does that represent?" Of course, Daniel would frame it in quantifiable metrics. "About 200,000 so far," I replied. "The publisher just ordered a fourth." Printing. My father's expression shifted again, this time to something I recognized from business negotiations: reassessment. "And the financial arrangement? These publishing contracts can be quite complex." "I have a good agent," I replied simply, declining to discuss the 6-figure advance and royalty structure that had allowed me to quit copywriting entirely. My mother, ever conscious of social appearances, attempted to recover. "This is wonderful news, Olivia. We must celebrate. Why didn't you bring a copy of your book tonight? We could have shown the Richardsons." The swift pivot from years of disinterest to public pride was jarring, but not surprising. "I didn't bring a copy because I wasn't planning to announce it tonight," I explained. "I only mentioned it because of the scheduling conflict with your photo shoot. The Times wants to interview me that week." "The New York Times," my father repeated, the implications of this level of recognition clearly recalibrating his assessment of my achievement. "Well, certainly we can work around your schedule. Perhaps we can even incorporate this accomplishment into the family narrative for the Business Insider feature." And there it was, the moment when my success, previously deemed insufficient and unworthy of acknowledgement, suddenly became valuable enough to be co-opted for the family brand. 7 years of being erased from family photographs, and now they wanted me front and center. My accomplishment another jewel in the Chen crown. "I'll need to check my publicity schedule," I said, neither accepting nor declining. "My publisher has several events planned around the paperback release." As coffee was served in the living room afterward, the dynamics had shifted noticeably. Patricia Richardson engaged me in an enthusiastic discussion about my characters and themes. My mother hovered nearby, interjecting comments that suggested intimate knowledge of a book she hadn't known existed until 20 minutes ago. My father spent time on his phone, and I suspected he was looking up sales figures and reviews of The Winter Station. Emma approached cautiously, coffee cup in hand. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice lower than usual. "We're family." "Are we?" I replied, not unkindly. "Emma, when was the last time you asked me about my writing, or anything important, to me, and actually listened to the answer?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I guess I assumed if something significant happened, you'd announce it. Like you announced your engagement? Or Daniel his promotions? Those were celebrated? Documented, shared. I've learned that what matters to me doesn't register as significant in this family, unless it fits a very specific definition of success." Before she could respond, my father rejoined the group, his expression now decidedly impressed. "The reviews are exceptional," he announced to the room at large. "The Chicago Tribune called it a masterful debut. The Guardian said it shows remarkable psychological insight. Why didn't you use your real name, Olivia? Chen is a respected name in this name." The question revealed so much about how fundamentally he misunderstood my journey. In his world, family connections were currency to be spent, not potential limitations to overcome. "I wanted my work to stand on its own merits," I explained, to be judged by the quality of my writing, not my family name or connections. He frowned slightly, genuinely perplexed by this reasoning. But the Chen name opens doors. It creates opportunities. Not all opportunities are worth having if they come at the expense of knowing your own value, I replied. As I drove home that night, the city skyline glittering against the darkness, I reflected on how a single evening had shifted the power dynamics of relationships established over decades. My success, achieved independently, on my own terms, through work my family had never valued, had suddenly made me visible in ways years of presence never had. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 7 years of being excluded from family photographs for being unsuccessful by their standards, I would now be pursued for inclusion because my success had become public enough to enhance their image. The question now was whether I would accept this conditional visibility, this recognition that came not from being valued, but from being valuable. And whether, in the days ahead, I could establish new terms for my relationship with a family that had only now discovered I was worth seeing. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, but I barely noticed the weather. After a restless night processing the events at dinner, I woke feeling more drained than when I'd gone to bed. I made coffee on autopilot and carried the steaming mug to my bay window, where Lake Michigan stretched before me like a sheet of hammered silver. The view had witnessed countless hours of my writing journey, early mornings of doubt and determination, late nights of creative breakthrough, moments of rejection and resilience. This window had framed my true success story, one invisible to my family until it received external validation. Pulling out my notebook, I began recording thoughts that had circled my mind throughout the night. Writing had always been how I processed complex emotions, transforming chaotic feelings into ordered words on the page. This morning, those words formed an accounting, not of my success, but of its absence in my family's narrative until now. I listed every family photograph taken in the last 7 years where I had been deliberately excluded or marginalized. Holiday cards 2016-2022, positioned behind others or asked to be photographer Emma's graduation. 2017, told to stand at the Chi. And, in case we need to crop for framing, Daniel's promotion celebration 2019. Asked to take all photos, included in Nun Family Vacation 2020. Present in 2 of 27 photos shared on social media. Thanksgiving 2021. Explicitly told the family portrait was just for those with something to celebrate this year. Christmas 2022. Olivia, you stand aside. This is for the holiday card. The pattern was clear and undeniable. My exclusion hadn't been incidental but intentional. A systematic erasure of the child who hadn't followed the prescribed path to success as defined by Edward Chen. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Darling, I've been thinking about your book all night. So proud. Can you bring a signed copy when you come for brunch next Sunday? The Harrisons will be there. Their daughter Melissa is struggling with her novel. Just a hobby, of course, and could use some encouragement. Before I could formulate a response, another message arrived, this one from my father. Impressive reviews on your book. We should discuss incorporating this into your bio for the Business Insider feature. The literary angle adds unexpected dimension to the Chen family brand. The casual presumption that I would now eagerly participate in their narrative, bringing signed books as props, allowing my achievement to be absorbed into the family brand, struck me as breathtakingly tone-deaf. My success wasn't being celebrated for its own merit, but for how it could be leveraged. I set the phone aside without answering either message and returned to my accounting. Beyond the visual erasure was something deeper, the emotional cost of years spent seeking validation from people fundamentally incapable of providing it. How many hours had I wasted hoping for acknowledgement that never came? How much creative energy had been diverted into managing disappointment? By mid-morning, Caroline called to discuss the upcoming New York Times interview. They want to focus on your rapid rise, she explained. The unusual path from debut to bestseller, the critical acclaim. But they're also interested in your background, what shaped you as a writer. What shaped me as a writer? I repeated, thinking of childhood journals hidden under mattresses, of stories shared only with Grandmother Lynn, of writing workshops attended in secret while telling my family I was taking business development courses. That's a complex question. Well, they specifically asked about family influences, Caroline continued. Writers often come from families with literary backgrounds. Is there any of that in your history? I thought of my grandmother, the literature professor who had recognized my talent and nurtured it in private conversations away from my parents' dismissive ears. One person, I admitted, my grandmother, but she's no longer living. I'm sorry to hear that, Caroline said gently. Would you be comfortable discussing her influence in the interview? Personal angles like that really connect with readers. I hesitated, protective of the one authentic relationship I'd had within my family. I'll consider it, I finally said. But Caroline, there's something else you should know. My family just learned about the book last night. They had no idea I was published, let alone successful. Wait, what? Caroline sounded genuinely shocked. You never told them? But the book's been out for 6 months. It's complicated, I said, knowing this barely scratched the surface. Let's just say literary achievement wasn't considered real success in my family. But now that it's received external validation, they suddenly care, Caroline finished, understanding immediately. That must be quite an adjustment. They don't care about the book, I clarified. They care about how my success reflects on them. My father's already talking about featuring it in some corporate marketing material. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Olivia, I've been your agent for 3 years. In that time, I've read everything you've written, published and unpublished. The themes of conditional acceptance, invisible achievement, and the search for authentic recognition run through all your work. Yes, I acknowledged, surprised by her insight. I always assumed those themes came from somewhere real, she continued carefully. But I never realized you were still living inside that story. Maybe it's time to write a new one, where you define what success means and who gets to be part of it. After we hung up, I walked to my bookshelves where 5 hardcover copies of The Winter Station stood in a neat row. I pulled one down, feeling its satisfying weight, running my fingers over the embossed title. This tangible evidence of my creation existed regardless of my family's acknowledgement or approval. Opening to the dedication page, I read the words I'd chosen months ago. For GL, who taught me that words have power when spoken in truth, and silence has power when chosen with purpose. Grandmother Lynn had understood the complex dynamics of our family better than anyone. Your parents don't recognize your gifts because they don't value what they themselves don't possess, she had told me once. Don't waste your life waiting for them to see you. Build something so magnificent, they can't help but look up. I had followed her advice, focusing on craft rather than recognition, authenticity rather than approval. The success that had followed wasn't the goal, but a byproduct of that commitment to truth. My phone rang, breaking my reverie. My father's name appeared on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Hello, Dad. Olivia. His voice had that brisk quality it took on when he was handling business matters. Your mother says, you haven't returned her text about Sunday brunch. I've been busy this morning, I replied, which wasn't untrue. He paused, and I could almost see him at his desk, impatiently tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the polished mahogany. About last night, I've been thinking about your announcement. And? I prompted when he didn't continue. I've looked into this O.J. Winter situation more thoroughly. The sales figures are impressive, The critical reception even more so. I have to admit, I underestimated the significance of your writing. The pause before writing spoke volumes, a habit formed over years of considering my passion a trivial pursuit. Even now, with evidence of its value before him, the pause remained. "Thank you for recognizing that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Patricia Richardson can't stop talking about your book," he continued. "She's apparently recommended it to half of Chicago. It occurs to me that we should capitalize on this momentum for the Business Insider feature. A multi-generational success story, finance and literature under one family banner." There it was again, success viewed through the lens of utility, of what it could provide to the family brand rather than what it meant to me personally. "Dad," I said carefully, "I need to clarify something. My writing career and identity as O.J. Winters exist independently of Chen Investments. I won't be participating in corporate marketing materials." Silence stretched across the line, taut, with surprise. My father had likely never heard me refuse a direct request before. "This isn't about marketing," he finally said, his tone sharpening. "It's about family legacy. Your success is part of the Chen family story." "Is it?" I asked, quietly. "Because until last night, you were quite comfortable with a family story that didn't include me at all." "That's an exaggeration," he protested. "You've always been included." "Dad, I have 7 years of family photos that prove otherwise. 7 years of holiday cards where I don't exist. 7 years of social media posts celebrating everyone's achievements but mine." "Those were—" He hesitated, clearly searching for justification. "Those were aesthetic choices your mother made. Nothing personal. Excluding your child from family documentation for 7 years is inherently personal," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "As is suddenly wanting to include me now that my success has external validation." Another stretch of silence, this one bristling with discomfort. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to the reasonable negotiator, approach he used with reluctant clients. "I understand you might feel overlooked in the past. That wasn't our intention. But moving forward, we want to properly celebrate your achievements as part of our family narrative." "The celebration feels conditional," I observed. "Based not on who I am, but on what my success provides to the family image." He sighed heavily. "Olivia, you're overthinking this. We're proud of you. We want to include you. Why make it complicated?" The question struck me as so fundamentally disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. "I'm not the one who made this complicated, Dad. I'm just finally acknowledging how complicated it's always been." After we hung up, I stood by my window watching sailboats navigate the lake. Each vessel charted its own course across the vastness, adjusting to winds and currents while maintaining its intended direction. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. For 7 years, I had accepted exclusion from my family's visual history, believing, on some level, that I deserved it for choosing a path they didn't value. I had maintained connection while accepting erasure, hoping that someday my worth would be recognized without external validation. Now that validation had arrived, bringing with it a sudden reversal of my family's appraisal, the writer in me recognized the narrative arc. The overlooked child finally receiving parental approval through public achievement. It was the stuff of countless redemption stories, the satisfying conclusion where persistence finally pays off, in recognition. But standing in my apartment surrounded by the life I'd built without their approval or support, I realized this wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a more important one. The real question wasn't whether they now saw my worth, but whether I would continue measuring my value through their recognition at all. I picked up my phone and composed a response to my mother. "Thank you for the brunch invitation. I won't be able to attend as I have a deadline for my second novel. I'm glad you're proud of my work, but I need to be clear. My writing isn't a hobby, a marketing angle, or a conversation piece for your social gatherings. It's my profession and my passion. When you're ready to engage with that reality, I'm open to a different kind of relationship. Then I opened my laptop and began working on my upcoming New York Times interview, determined to tell a story of success defined not by external validation or family approval, but by authenticity, resilience, and the courage to remain visible, even when others refuse to see you. Setting boundaries. Monday morning arrived with a flurry of emails from my publisher. The New York Times bestseller announcement had triggered a cascade of interview requests, bookstore events, and literary festival invitations. My quiet, anonymous success was transforming into a public-facing career, whether I was prepared for it or not. I was reviewing a particularly interesting invitation to speak at the Chicago Literary Festival when my office phone rang. The receptionist at my building sounded apologetic. "Ms. Chen, your sister is in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's insisting on seeing you. Says it's important." I glanced at my calendar, already packed with calls and deadlines. "I'll come down," I said after a moment's hesitation. Emma was pacing the marble lobby in designer heels, looking distinctly out of place among the creative professionals in casual attire who populated my building. When she saw me, her expressions cycled through relief, nervousness, and finally determination. "We need to talk," she announced, loud enough that several people glanced our way. "Let's walk," I suggested, gesturing toward the exit. "There's a coffee shop around the corner." Once settled at a corner table with lattes, Emma studied me with the intensity she usually reserved for evaluating potential social connections. "You've upset Mom and Dad," she began without preamble. "Dad's been making phone calls all morning trying to salvage the Business Insider feature, and Mom had to cancel brunch with the Harrisons because she couldn't face explaining why you wouldn't be there to sign your book." I took a measured sip of my coffee. "I'm sorry they're upset, but I was clear about my boundaries." "Boundaries?" Emma repeated the word as if I'd introduced a foreign concept. "Olivia, they're your parents. They're proud of you and want to celebrate your success. Why are you making this difficult?" The familiar framing, that establishing any expectations for how I should be treated constituted making things difficult, was so predictable I almost smiled. "Emma, for 7 years I've been systematically excluded from family photographs because my career choices didn't align with Dad's definition of success. Now that my work has received external validation, I'm suddenly valuable enough to be included in the family narrative. Don't you see how conditional that acceptance is?" Emma shifted uncomfortably. "That's not fair. The photos were Mom's thing, and you know how she is about aesthetics and presentation." "Is aesthetics why I was told to step aside for the Christmas card photo because it was featuring your engagement and Daniel's promotion? Was I visually unappealing, or was my lack of success the aesthetic problem?" Emma had the grace to look discomfited. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said gently. "And the fact that neither you nor Daniel ever questioned or objected to my exclusion speaks volumes." "We didn't think it bothered you," she protested. "You never said anything." "Would it have made a difference if I had?" Her silence was answer enough. "Look," I continued, "I'm not angry at you or Daniel. You followed the path laid out for you and received the approval and recognition that came with that choice. That was your right. But I chose a different path, one that was meaningful to me even without family validation. The fact that my success now makes me suddenly worthy of inclusion in the family narrative says more about our parents' values than it does about my achievements." Emma's expression softened slightly. "I get that you're hurt." "I'm not hurt," I interrupted, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I'm aware. There's a difference. Hurt implies I'm still seeking something I haven't received. Awareness means I see the pattern clearly and am making choices based on that clarity." She studied me with newfound attentiveness. You've changed. Success hasn't changed me, Emma. It's just made visible what was already there. She twisted her diamond engagement ring, a nervous habit since Anthony had proposed. So, what happens? Now, you just disconnect from the family? I'm not disconnecting. I'm establishing conditions under which I'm willing to engage. There's a difference. Like refusing to come to brunch? Like declining to be a prop in a social performance? Where my book is used as a conversation piece, but my experience as its author is irrelevant. Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at me with visible conflict in her expression. It's Mom, she explained. She wants to know if I've talked sense into you yet about the photo shoot. And have you? I asked, genuinely curious, about her assessment. She sighed. I think I understand your position better, even if I don't entirely agree with it. But Olivia, what do you actually want from them? An apology for the photos? Public acknowledgement that they underestimated you? What would make this right? It was a fair question, one I'd been contemplating since Saturday night. I want authenticity, I said finally. I want them to see me, not my success or what it provides to the family image, but me. I want them to understand that my worth as their daughter exists independently of external validation, and I want them to recognize how their conditional acceptance shaped both my journey and our relationship. Emma looked genuinely perplexed. But how would they demonstrate that? Dad's trying to feature your success in a major business publication. Mom wants to show off your book to all her friends. Isn't that seeing you? They're seeing the successful author, not their daughter who writes. There's a crucial difference. I don't understand, Emma admitted. I know, I said, without judgment. That's part of the problem. As we parted outside the coffee shop, Emma hesitated, then asked, Will you at least think about the photo shoot? It's important to Dad. I'll consider it, I conceded, but on my terms, not his. Back in my apartment, I found 3 voicemails from my mother, each increasingly distressed. I was composing a response email when my phone rang again. Daniel this time. I hear you're causing drama, he said by way of greeting, his tone light but with an undercurrent of accusation. Is that what Emma reported? Emma said you're having an existential crisis about family photos. Mom says you're punishing them for not predicting your success. Dad says you're being difficult about the Business Insider piece because you want special treatment. Fascinating how everyone has a theory about my motivations without actually listening to what I've said, I observed. Daniel sighed. Look, I get it. You feel underappreciated. But isn't success the best revenge? You've proven them wrong. Take the win and move on. This isn't about revenge, Daniel. It's about establishing a healthier dynamic moving forward. By refusing to participate in family events? By declining to continue patterns that reinforce conditional acceptance? There was a pause. Then, Daniel said, You know, this whole situation reminds me of those psychological themes you write about in your book. I almost dropped my phone in surprise. You've read my book? Of course I have, he replied, sounding slightly offended. I ordered it as soon as I got home Saturday night. Finished it yesterday. It's really good, Liv. I had no idea you could write like that. For the first time since the dinner revelation, I felt a genuine connection with a family member. Thank you. That means a lot. The protagonist's relationship with her father, that controlling guy who can't see beyond his own definition of success, that wasn't subtle, by the way. I laughed despite myself. Fiction allows for exploration of truth that might be too difficult to address directly. Well, it's addressed now, Daniel said. Dad's been telling business associates his daughter is a literary phenomenon all morning. Mom's ordered 20 copies of your book to distribute to her book club friends. The Chen family narrative is being hastily rewritten to include its prodigal literary daughter. That's exactly the problem, I pointed out. The narrative changes, based on external validation, not genuine acceptance of who I am. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I never thought about it that way, he finally admitted. But Liv, I don't think they know how. Dad measures everything by observable metrics, profit margins, market share, social status. Asking him to value something for its intrinsic worth rather than its external validation is like asking him to breathe underwater. It was an insight I hadn't expected from my finance-focused brother. That doesn't mean I have to accept those terms, I said gently. No, he agreed. It doesn't. But it might mean recognizing that their current attempts, however misguided, represent the closest approximation to understanding they're capable of right now. After we hung up, I considered Daniel's perspective. Was I expecting too much? Was conditional acceptance, being valued for what I achieved rather than who I was, simply the reality of our family dynamic? The question followed me throughout the day as I worked on interview preparations and responded to congratulatory messages from colleagues and friends. By evening, I'd reached a decision that felt aligned with my values while acknowledging the limitations Daniel had identified. I picked up my phone and called my father directly. "Olivia," he answered on the second ring, his tone cautiously neutral. "I was just thinking about you." "I've been thinking about you too," I replied, "and about the Business Insider feature. Have you reconsidered your position?" His voice immediately brightened. "I've clarified it," I corrected. "I'm willing to participate in the photo shoot and interview under specific conditions." "I'm listening." The negotiator was back, recognizing terms being proposed. "First, any discussion of my writing career remains separate from Chen Investments. My success as an author isn't part of the family business narrative." He started to protest, but I continued. "Second, I'll participate in family photographs. Moving forward, only if that inclusion isn't contingent on external achievements. No more strategic absences or positioning me out of frame because I don't fit the success narrative." "That's not," he began. "It is what happened," I interrupted. Firmly. "And it needs explicit acknowledgement before we move forward." There was a long pause. When my father spoke again, his voice had lost its business tone, revealing something more personal beneath. "You really felt excluded all these years?" "I was excluded, Dad. Not in my perception, but in reality. 7 years of family photographs document that exclusion quite clearly." Another pause, longer this time. "Your mother handled most of those decisions, but I didn't question them," he finally admitted. "I should have." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Edward Chen it was an unprecedented acknowledgement of oversight. "I have one more condition," I said. "I want you and Mom to read my book before the photo shoot, not to discuss it with your friends or business associates, not to feature it in conversation at social gatherings, just to read it privately as something I created." "We've already ordered copies," he assured me quickly. "I'm sending signed ones tonight," I countered. "First editions. I want you to read those." "Of course," he agreed, sounding slightly puzzled by the specificity of this request. What I didn't tell him was that each copy contained a personal inscription, words I'd never found the courage to speak directly, but had channeled into my fiction. Words about seeking validation, about measuring worth through achievement, about the cost of conditional love. Words that might create a bridge of understanding if they were open to crossing it. "Then we have an agreement," I said, falling unconsciously into the contract language he respected. "We do," he confirmed. "And Olivia, congratulations. What you've accomplished, it's significant." It wasn't the acknowledgement I'd once desperately sought, but it was a beginning. As I hung up, I felt neither triumph nor resignation, but something more nuanced, a quiet determination to remain, true to my own definition of success while creating space for evolution in relationships that had seemed fixed in unhealthy patterns. Later that evening, as I packaged the signed books for courier delivery to my parents' home, I included a note with a quote from The Winter Station that had particular resonance. Recognition isn't the measure of worth, but merely its occasional witness. The true value exists in the creating, in the becoming, in the quiet certainty of purpose that requires no external confirmation to validate its significance. It was a truth I had discovered through writing, through creating worlds and characters that existed whether or not anyone ever read them. Now, as my work found its audience and my family scrambled to reposition me in their narrative, it was the truth I needed most to remember. The books would arrive at my parents' home tomorrow morning. Whether they would truly read them, whether they would recognize themselves in the fictional dynamics I'd created, whether this might begin a genuine transformation in our relationship, these questions remained unanswered. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for those answers to determine my worth or my next steps. I had a New York Times interview to prepare for, a second novel to complete, and a life defined by my own values to continue building, regardless of who might finally be willing to see it. When words find their audience. The courier confirmed. Delivery of the signed books to my parents' home at 9:47 Wednesday morning. I tried not to fixate on whether they were reading them, instead channeling my energy into interview preparation and final edits on The Silent Season, my second novel. By Thursday afternoon, I still hadn't heard from either of my parents. The silence wasn't surprising. They were processing not just my boundaries, but potentially recognizing themselves in the fictional family dynamics I'd created in The Winter Station. If they were truly reading the book as I'd asked, they would encounter passages that might be uncomfortable to recognize. What did surprise me was the email that arrived from Patricia Richardson at 3:15 p.m. Olivia, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Your father shared your email address. I wanted to tell you personally how much your novel moved me. Our book club selected it last month, before I knew the connection, and we spent hours discussing the protagonist's journey towards self-validation, independent of family approval. The scene where Eliza discovers her artwork removed from the family home and replaced with her brother's finance degree was particularly powerful. The parallel to what you shared at dinner about being excluded from family photos was not lost on me. I've withdrawn our firm from the Chen Investments rebranding campaign. I explained to your father that I couldn't in good conscience participate in a project that incorporated your literary success into a narrative that had previously excluded you. Your courage in both your writing and your personal boundaries is inspiring. If you're ever interested in sharing your journey with other young writers, the Chicago Arts Foundation, where I serve on the board, would be honored to host you. Wishing you continued success on your own terms, Patricia Richardson. I read the email twice, processing its implications. Patricia had not only recognized the autobiographical elements in my fiction, but had taken a concrete stand based on that. Understanding, potentially at significant professional cost. The Chen account would have been lucrative for her marketing firm. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. My father. Did you know Patricia Richardson was going to withdraw from our marketing campaign? He demanded without greeting, his voice tightly controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. I just received an email from her, I replied calmly. It was as much a surprise to me as it evidently is to you. She cited ethical concerns about the narrative, he continued. Said she couldn't support a campaign that appropriated your success after years of exclusion. Those were her exact words, Olivia. Did you say something to her? I haven't spoken with Patricia since dinner Saturday night, I said truthfully. But I'm not surprised she made the connection between my novel and our family dynamics. She's insightful, and the parallels aren't particularly subtle. My father was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its accusatory edge. Your mother and I have been reading your book, he said. She finished it last night. I'm about halfway through. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. They were actually reading it, not just displaying it as evidence of their daughter's success, but engaging with the story I'd created. What do you think so far? I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite the sudden acceleration of my heartbeat. It's uncomfortable, he admitted. The father character, Harrison, his inability to value anything that can't be measured in dollars or status. His dismissal of his daughter's artistic talent because it doesn't fit his definition of success. My father paused. He's not a flattering portrait. He's a fictional character, I said gently. With familiar qualities? My father countered. Your mother recognized herself too in Eleanor's social climbing and image obsession. She was quite upset last night. I hadn't anticipated they would acknowledge the parallels so directly. Fiction allows exploration of difficult truths, I said carefully, but it's not a direct transcription of reality. No, but it's a powerful mirror, my father replied. Olivia, did you send us these books knowing we would see ourselves in these characters? I sent them hoping you would understand my experience through fiction in ways you haven't been able to through direct conversation, I answered honestly. Another pause, longer this time. I think I'm beginning to, he said finally. But Olivia, this Harrison character, is that really how you see me? As someone incapable of valuing anything beyond material success? The vulnerability in the question caught me off guard. Edward Chen, chairman of Chen Investments, asking his novelist daughter if a fictional character represented her true perception of him. Fiction is more complex than simple representation, I explained. Harrison has aspects of you, yes, but also elements drawn from other sources. What matters isn't whether he's an exact portrait, but whether his relationship with his daughter illuminates something true about our relationship. And does it? He pressed. Yes, I said simply. The conditional acceptance. The validation that depends on achievement rather than inherent worth. The inability to see value in pursuits that don't align with predetermined definitions of success. Those elements are drawn from my experience. I waited for defensiveness, or denial, the patterns I'd come to expect from my father when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Instead, what came was a question that revealed more openness than I'd ever heard from him. When did it start? He asked quietly. This feeling of conditional acceptance? The question opened a door to conversation we'd never had in 36 years of being father and daughter. I was 9, I began, when I won the statewide creative writing contest. You and Mom didn't come to the ceremony because Daniel had a soccer tournament the same day. You said, writing contests don't lead anywhere important, but sports teach valuable life skills. That was the first time I consciously understood that my interests were considered less worthy than my siblings. As I spoke, memories surfaced that I'd channeled into fiction but rarely articulated directly. The high school literary magazine awards ceremony my parents skipped to attend Emma's chorus concert. The summer creative writing program they refused. To fund while paying for Daniel's business camp. The countless dismissive comments about authors living in fantasy worlds, while real success happened in boardrooms. My father listened without interruption, a rarity in itself. When I finished, the silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but weighty with recognition. I never considered. He finally said, then stopped and started again. I always thought I was guiding you toward security and stability. Success as I understood it. I know, I acknowledged. You wanted what you believed was best for me. But you never asked what I wanted for myself, or recognized that my definition of success might be valid even if it differed from yours. And now you've achieved remarkable success by any definition, he observed, without our support or guidance. That's not entirely true, I countered. Grandmother Lynn supported my writing from the beginning. She saw value in it long before external validation arrived. My mother always was wiser than me in these matters, my father said with unexpected gentleness. She understood people in ways I never mastered. I understood markets, investments, strategic positioning, but human hearts remained mysterious territory. This admission of limitation from a man who prided himself on mastery was perhaps the most surprising development of our conversation. Your book, he continued after a moment, it's truly exceptional, Olivia, not because it's successful or acclaimed, though it is both those things, but because it reveals truth through invention. I never understood that was possible. Coming from Edward Chen, this represented extraordinary recognition, acknowledgement of value in something he had previously dismissed as frivolous. The photo shoot, he said abruptly, changing direction. I've been thinking about your conditions. They're reasonable, more than reasonable, given the context you've shared. But I'd like to propose an alternative approach entirely. I'm listening, I said cautiously. Instead of the corporate branding exercise with Business Insider, what if we did something more authentic? A family portrait, not for publication or promotion, just for us. Not because of what any of us has achieved, but because we're family, with all the complexity that entails. The suggestion was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I knew about my father's approach to family documentation, that for a moment I thought I'd misheard. You want a family portrait just for us? Not for public consumption or the corporate website or holiday cards? Yes, he confirmed. A true record, not a performance. You've helped me see the difference. Later that evening, my phone lit up, with a text from my mother, the first direct communication since I'd declined her brunch invitation. I finished your book last night. I didn't sleep afterward. I kept seeing myself in Eleanor's desperate need for social validation. Her blindness, to her daughter's pain while chasing appearances. I never intended to hurt you by excluding you from our family record. I thought I was creating a narrative of success to inspire you toward it. Instead, I was telling you that you weren't enough as you were. I'm so deeply sorry, Olivia. The message continued. Your father tells me you've discussed a new approach to family photography. I support it completely. I also wonder if you might consider having coffee with me. Not at the club or anywhere public. Just the two of us, talking honestly for perhaps the first time. As I contemplated my response, my phone buzzed again with an incoming call. Caroline, my agent. The Times interview is set for Tuesday, she announced. They want to do a photo shoot as well. In your writing space, if possible. That works, I agreed. And Olivia? They're particularly interested in the personal story behind your pen name and your seemingly overnight success. How much of your family background are you comfortable discussing? I considered the developments of the past few days, my father's unprecedented vulnerability, my mother's genuine remorse, the possibility of evolution in relationships I had assumed were fixed in dysfunctional patterns. I'm comfortable sharing my journey, I said carefully, but without portraying my family as antagonists in my success story. The reality is more nuanced than that narrative would suggest. All right, Caroline said, sounding slightly puzzled by this approach. But you know a dramatic narrative of overcoming family disapproval would make compelling press, right? The excluded daughter vindicated by massive success is the kind of story readers love. It would make a good story, I acknowledged, but not a complete one. Real relationships are more complex than neat narrative arcs where someone is either villain or hero. My family failed to see my value for years, yes, but they're beginning to see it now, not just because of external validation, but because they're genuinely trying to understand. That's remarkably generous, Caroline observed. It's not about generosity, I corrected her. It's about accuracy. The story isn't over yet. It's still being written by all of us. After we hung up, I texted my mother accepting her invitation for coffee. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting notes for the Times interview. Thoughts about success defined not by external metrics, but by alignment with authentic purpose. About visibility that comes from creating work that matters, rather than conforming to others' expectations. A notification appeared on my screen. An email from my publisher with the preliminary cover design for The Silent Season. Seeing my name, my real name, as I'd decided to forego the pen name for this second book, on the cover created a surge of emotion I hadn't anticipated. This novel would enter the world without masks or pseudonyms, a declaration of identity and ownership of my creative voice. Another text arrived, this one from Emma. Just finished your book. Why didn't you tell me how you felt all these years? I would have said something about the photos, about how Mom and Dad treated your writing. I didn't see it, Liv. I'm sorry. The message continued. Anthony says your book helped him understand his own sister's struggle as the impractical one in their family of doctors. You're not just telling your story, you're telling so many people's stories. That's a different kind of success than what Dad always pushed, but maybe more meaningful. This insight from my status-conscious sister represented its own kind of evolution. Perhaps the truth-telling power of fiction had reached her in ways direct conversation never could. As night fell over Chicago, I stood at my window watching lights flicker across the lake. 7 years of exclusion from family photographs had felt like erasure at the time, a painful denial of my existence and value. Yet that very exclusion had forced me to define myself independently of family validation, to build an identity and purpose rooted in authentic passion rather than external approval. The irony wasn't lost on me that my success had made me visible to my family again. But what felt different now was the possibility that they were beginning to see me. Not just the best-selling author worthy of inclusion in the family narrative, but the daughter whose value had always existed independent of achievement or recognition. Whether this evolution would continue, whether our relationship could transform into something healthier and more authentic, these questions remained unanswered. But for perhaps the first time, I was approaching those questions not from a place of need or wounded expectation, but from a position of self-defined worth and purpose. I had written myself into existence through fiction when family photographs erased me from the visual record. Now that very act of creation was potentially writing new possibilities into relationships long defined by limitation and conditional acceptance. Tomorrow would bring coffee with my mother, continued conversation with my father, perhaps new understanding with my siblings. But whatever happened, I would remain the author of my own story, visible or invisible in family photographs, but undeniably, irrevocably present in the pages I had written and would continue to write. Truth in sunlight. Friday morning dawned with unexpected clarity, both in the pristine blue sky outside my window and in my own sense of purpose. I'd arranged to meet my mother at a small cafe near the lakefront, a neutral territory away from both the Chen family estate and my personal sanctuary. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table where we could speak privately. The cafe was one I frequented when working through difficult plot points, a place where the ambient hum of conversation and the scent of fresh coffee created the perfect environment for untangling complex narrative threads. Today, those threads were personal rather than fictional. My mother entered precisely at 10 o'clock, her punctuality as reliable as ever. Catherine Chen had built her social reputation on flawless presentation, and today was no exception. Designer trench coat, understated jewelry, hair arranged in a perfect silver-streaked chignon, but beneath this immaculate exterior, I noticed something new. A hesitancy in her posture, an uncertainty in her gaze as she scanned the room for me. When our eyes met, her practiced social smile faltered, replaced by something more genuine, but also more vulnerable. I stood to greet her, and we exchanged an awkward half-hug before settling at the table. Thank you for meeting me, she began, her hands clasped tightly around her untouched coffee cup. I wasn't sure you would. I appreciate you suggesting it, I replied, maintaining the neutral tone I'd prepared. For a moment, we sat in silence. 36 years of carefully maintained appearances creating a barrier more substantial than the small table between us. My mother glanced around the cafe, taking in the eclectic artwork on the walls, the mix of students and professionals tapping on laptops. Is this where you write? She asked, seeming genuinely curious. Sometimes, I acknowledged, when my apartment feels too isolated or I need a change of environment. She nodded, absorbing this small detail about my creative process with surprising attentiveness. I never understood how writing works, she admitted. The practical aspects of it. Do you keep regular hours? Is it like going to an office? The unexpected question, focused on the actual mechanics of my profession rather than its marketable outcomes, caught me off guard. It varies, I explained, warming to the subject, despite my initial reserve. I'm most productive in the mornings, so I usually write from about 6 until noon. Afternoons are for research, correspondence, editing. But during intensive drafting periods or close to deadlines, the schedule becomes more fluid. 6 in the morning, she repeated, looking faintly surprised. You always were an early riser, even as a child. I remember finding you reading by flashlight at 5 a.m. when you were 7 or 8. This casual recollection, evidence that she had noticed and remembered details about me beyond academic achievements or social presentations, created a small crack in the wall of distance between us. Mom, I said gently, steering us toward the conversation we needed to have. In your text, you mentioned seeing yourself in Eleanor's character from my book. She flinched slightly but nodded. The scene where she repositions her daughter at the family reunion to hide her bohemian appearance from the photographer. Where she says, "This is for the Christmas card, darling, and we have standards to maintain." My mother's voice caught on the last words. I said something very similar to you at last year's holiday gathering, didn't I? Almost word for word, I confirmed. She closed her eyes briefly. When I read that passage, I felt physically ill. Seeing my own behavior reflected back at me through your character's actions. It forced me to recognize what I've been doing all these years. Which is what exactly? I pressed, needing to hear her articulate the pattern she'd finally recognized. Curating a family image that excluded you when you didn't conform to my narrow definition of what deserved visibility, she said with surprising directness. Using family photographs as tools of approval and disapproval, documenting only the achievements I understood and valued while erasing evidence of paths I couldn't appreciate. The clarity of her self-assessment was unexpected. I had prepared for defensiveness, for qualifications, for the subtle deflections that had characterized our interactions for years. Instead, my mother was offering unvarnished acknowledgement of exactly what her behavior had communicated. Why? I asked simply. Was my choice to pursue writing rather than business really so disappointing? It wasn't disappointment exactly, she said after a moment's consideration. It was fear, and perhaps a kind of blindness. She took a careful sip of her coffee before continuing. Your father and I grew up with very specific understandings of success and security. Measurable achievements, recognized credentials, visible status markers. I didn't know how to value work whose worth wasn't immediately apparent to others. So when I chose a path where validation might not come for years, if ever, I didn't know how to support something I couldn't guarantee or control, she finished. And I worried constantly that you were setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. So you created that disappointment preemptively, I observed without rancor. By withholding the validation you thought the world might never give me. My mother flinched at the accuracy of this assessment. I told myself I was being realistic, protecting you by not encouraging impractical dreams. She shook her head slowly. But reading your book made me realize how much damage that protection inflicted. The character based on me, she thinks she's shielding her daughter from pain, but she's actually causing it. Art often reveals truths we can't access through direct confrontation, I said. Your grandmother understood that, my mother replied, unexpectedly. Lynn always defended your writing, even when Edward and I dismissed it as impractical. Catherine, she told me once, Olivia sees truths you and Edward miss because you're too focused on appearance. Someday her vision will force you to see differently. I thought she was being a doting grandmother, making excuses for a grandchild's impractical tendencies. She was my first real reader, I said, remembering those precious hours in Grandmother. Lynn's study, discussing character motivations and plot structures when I was still learning the craft. She believed in my voice before I fully trusted it myself. Lynn would be so proud of what you've accomplished, my mother said, genuine emotion breaking through her composed exterior. Not just the success, but the courage to pursue your path, despite our lack of support. The mention of my grandmother created an unexpected bridge between us, a shared connection to a woman who had seen value where others missed it, who had understood that success could take forms beyond balance sheets and social standing. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, Olivia, my mother continued after a moment. What I did, systematically excluding you from our family's visual history, was a form of erasure that can't be undone with simple apologies. Those photographs can't be retaken. Those moments can't be recaptured. Her clear-eyed acknowledgement of irreversible damage was perhaps the most surprising development of our conversation. Catherine Chen, who had spent decades controlling family, narratives and preserving perfect appearances, was finally confronting the consequences of that control without qualification or defense. No, they can't, I agreed. But moving forward doesn't require rewriting the past. It requires honesty about why it happened and commitment to different choices now. My mother nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what that might look like, practically. Your father mentioned a new approach to family photography, one based on authentic connection rather than performance or achievement. He suggested a portrait just for us, not for public consumption or corporate branding, I confirmed. Would you consider something more? She asked, reaching into her handbag and removing a small leather-bound album I'd never seen before. This arrived yesterday. She slid the album across the table. Opening it, I found not recent photographs but historical ones. Images from my childhood and early adulthood that I'd never seen displayed in the family home or included in official albums. There I was at 8, proudly holding up a story I'd written, my front teeth missing and hair in uneven pigtails. Another showed me at 12, intensely focused on a notebook at Grandmother Lynn's kitchen table. There was 16-year-old me receiving a writing award my parents had been too busy to attend, captured by my grandmother's camera. Page after page documented moments in my development as a writer, moments that had never been deemed worthy of inclusion in the official Chen family narrative. Where did these come from? I asked, my voice unsteady as I turned the pages. Lynn kept them, my mother explained. All these years she maintained a separate photographic record of your journey. She left instructions in her will that this album should be given to you when the world finally sees what I've always seen. Her executor contacted me after news of your bestseller status became public. The realization that my grandmother had not only supported my writing privately, but had systematically documented its development, creating a counter-narrative to the official family story from which I'd been excluded, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. She saw me, I whispered, tracing a finger over an image of my teenage self absorbed in writing by the lake at our family's summer home. Even when no one else did. She wasn't the only one who saw you, my mother said quietly. I saw you too. I just didn't know how to value what I was seeing. She reached into her bag again and removed a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. This is the first story you ever had published. In the middle school literary journal. When you were 13. I kept it, though I never told you. I stared at her in disbelief. You kept this? All these years? Along with every publication since, she admitted, in a file in my desk. I couldn't bring myself to display them publicly when I was so afraid they represented a path to disappointment. But I couldn't bring myself to discard evidence of your passion either. This revelation, that my mother had privately documented my writing journey while publicly erasing it from the family narrative, complicated the story I'd told myself about her dismissal of my work. Not simple rejection then, but a complex knot of pride, fear, and inability to reconcile competing values. Mom, I said carefully, processing this new information, would you be willing to bring that file to the family portrait session Dad suggested? Not to change the past or pretend you always supported my writing publicly, but to acknowledge that part of moving forward is integrating these separate narratives, bringing what was hidden into the light. For the first time in our conversation, my mother smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her carefully maintained features into something warmer and more authentic. I would like that very much, she said. And Olivia, there's something else I want to ask. Your second novel, the one you're finishing now, would you allow me to read it before publication? Not to judge or critique, but to understand your voice more fully. The request represented a fundamental shift in our dynamic. My mother positioning herself as a reader rather than an evaluator, seeking to understand rather than assess. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. As we parted, outside the cafe 2 hours later, our conversation having expanded to include topics we'd never discussed openly before, my mother hesitated, then asked, "Will you be free for dinner next week? Just the two of us. There's a new literary-themed restaurant downtown I thought you might enjoy." I'd like that, I repeated, recognizing the genuine effort behind her suggestion, choosing a venue aligned with my interests rather than her usual social haunts. Walking back along the lakefront afterward, I felt a shifting in my perception of the past 7 years. The erasure from family photographs had been real, the pain of exclusion genuine. But alongside that narrative had run another, my grandmother's. Careful documentation of my development as a writer, my mother's private preservation of my publications, threads of recognition and value that had existed beneath the surface of dismissal. This complexity didn't erase the harm or justify the exclusion, but it created space for a more nuanced understanding of how people could simultaneously fail to see and acknowledge value while still registering its presence at some level. Still, preserving evidence of what they couldn't yet fully appreciate. When I reached my apartment, I found an email from my editor with the finalized cover art for The Silent Season attached. Seeing my name on the cover, my real name, Olivia Chen, not the pen name I'd hidden behind for my debut, created a surge of emotion I hadn't anticipated. This second novel would enter the world without shields or masks, a declaration of identity that encompassed both my individual creative voice and the family legacy embedded in my surname. Not because that legacy defined me, but because I had defined myself clearly enough to incorporate it without being diminished by it. Below the cover image, my editor had included a note. The marketing team is excited about your New York Times interview next week. They're particularly interested in exploring the decision to publish under your real name for this second novel. Any thoughts on how you want to frame that narrative? I began drafting a response, finding words for a journey more complex than simple vindication, more nuanced than triumph over adversity. The transition from pen name to real name reflects my evolution not just as a writer, but as a person. Initially, I separated my creative identity from my personal history, believing success required that division. With this second novel, I'm integrating those aspects of self, acknowledging that my work emerges from my complete experience, including the complex family dynamics that both challenged and shaped me. O.J. Winters wrote from a place of necessary separation. Olivia Chen writes from a place of hard-won integration, not because external validation made that possible, but because internal clarity made it inevitable. The journey between these two authorial identities is the real story behind the books. As I wrote, I realized I was articulating not just a marketing narrative, but a personal truth, one that encompassed both the pain of exclusion and the possibility of reconciliation, both the necessity of establishing independence and the value of remaining connected to origins, however complicated those connections might be. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Your mother told me about your conversation. Thank you for meeting with her. The family portrait photographer is confirmed for next Saturday at 11 a.m. Not at the house, but at the lakefront, where we used to take you children when you were young. A place with genuine meaning rather than staged perfection. This small but significant choice of location, prioritizing authentic connection over impressive backdrop, suggested my father too was rethinking how family narrative might be documented and shared. The story wasn't over, the evolution not complete. One conversation couldn't undo years of conditional acceptance. One portrait couldn't restore what had been erased from the visual record. But perhaps they could begin a new chapter, one where visibility wasn't contingent on conformity, where worth wasn't measured by external metrics, where family connection existed alongside individual authenticity rather than in opposition to it. And perhaps that was the most meaningful success of all, not the bestseller list or critical acclaim, but the courage to remain visible in your truth until others finally develop the capacity to see. Tuesday morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. The New York Times interview represented a pivotal moment, my first major media appearance as O.J. Winters, soon to be revealed as Olivia Chen. The interviewer, Madeline Torres, had established a reputation for insightful literary profiles that explored the person behind the prose. I spent the early hours preparing my writing space for the accompanying photo shoot. My bay window nook overlooked the lake, now shimmering under spring sunshine. Bookshelves lined the adjacent wall, organized not by color or size, but by influence, the authors whose work had shaped my own understanding of craft and voice. Grandmother Lynn's vintage desk lamp occupied the corner of my writing desk, a small brass owl that had illuminated her academic papers and later my earliest stories. The photographer arrived first, surveying the space with professional interest. "This is perfect," she commented, adjusting her equipment. "Natural light, personal elements, uncluttered but lived in. We want to show you in your creative environment, but also capture something of the person behind the bestseller." "That's the theme of the day, apparently," I replied with a slight smile. Madeline arrived precisely at 10, professional yet approachable in her demeanor. After preliminary introductions and setup, she began with what seemed like a straightforward question. "You published your debut novel under the pen name O.J. Winters, but your upcoming book will feature your real name, Olivia Chen. What prompted that change?" Though anticipated, the question still required careful consideration. This interview would establish the public narrative around my identity as an author. More importantly, it would become part of my family's understanding of our evolving story. When I began writing The Winter Station, I needed separation between my personal history and my creative voice, I explained. The pen name provided a necessary boundary, allowing the work to exist independently of family expectations or preconceptions. "And now?" Madeline prompted. "Now I recognize that integration serves my work better than separation. My experiences, including the complex family dynamics that both challenged and shaped me, inform my writing in essential ways. Using my real name acknowledges that connection rather than disguising it." The photographer moved around us, capturing images as we spoke. I was conscious of being documented, of becoming visible in a deliberate, chosen way that contrasted sharply with my years of family erasure. Your debut novel features a protagonist struggling for recognition within a family that values certain types of achievement while dismissing others, Madeline observed. Given what you've just shared, I have to ask, how autobiographical is that narrative? This was the question I'd been preparing for, the one that would define how much of my personal experience became part of my public identity as an author. Fiction transforms lived experience into something simultaneously more universal and more specific than autobiography, I began. Eliza's journey in The Winter Station draws from emotional truths I've experienced. The challenge of pursuing passion without external validation, the complexity of family relationships where love and disapproval coexist, the process of defining success on your own terms. But Eliza isn't you? Madeline clarified. She's braver in some ways, more fragile in others. She makes choices I wouldn't make and avoids ones I couldn't avoid. I paused, considering how much to reveal. What we share is the experience of having to become visible to ourselves before we could be truly seen by others. Madeline's eyes sharpened with interest. Can you elaborate on that? What does it mean to become visible to yourself? The question cut to the heart of my journey, both as a writer and as a daughter seeking authentic connection within a family that had struggled to see me. It means recognizing your own value independent of external validation, I explained. Understanding that worth exists whether or not it's acknowledged by others. Creating not for recognition, but because creation itself matters. That's a profound perspective for someone whose work has received such significant external validation, Madeline noted. Many writers spend careers seeking the level of recognition your debut achieved almost immediately. The recognition came after years of writing without it, I reminded her. I completed 2 unpublished novels before The Winter Station. I spent a decade developing my craft with no guarantee that anyone beyond my immediate circle would ever read my work. What sustained you during that period? She asked. I glanced at Grandmother Lynn's brass owl lamp, its presence a tangible connection to the person who had first truly seen me as a writer. Faith in the value of the work itself, I replied. And one person who believed in my voice before anyone else did, my grandmother. She was a literature professor who recognized something in my early writing that my parents couldn't yet see. Your parents weren't supportive of your literary ambitions? This was the moment where the narrative could easily slip into simplistic terms, the unsupportive family eventually proven wrong by spectacular success. The vindication story readers might find satisfying, but that would reduce complex human relationships to literary tropes. My parents valued security and measurable achievement, I said carefully. They worried that writing offered neither. Their concern came from love, even if its expression sometimes felt like dismissal. And now? Has your success changed their perspective? I thought about the past week's revelations, my mother's private collection of my publications, my father's unprecedented vulnerability, my siblings' evolving understanding. Success created a bridge for conversation that wasn't possible before, I acknowledged. But the more meaningful change isn't their recognition of my achievement, but their willingness to see the journey that preceded it, to value not just the outcome but the process and passion that made it possible. Madeline studied me thoughtfully. That's a remarkably generous perspective. Many in your position might frame this as vindication, proving wrong those who doubted you. Vindication makes for a satisfying narrative conclusion, I agreed. But real relationships are ongoing stories without neat endings. The goal isn't to win an argument, but to establish authentic connection. As the interview continued, I found myself articulating insights about craft, inspiration, and the themes of my upcoming novel. The photographer captured images of me in different areas, of my writing space, at the desk, by the window, among my books. being deliberately documented after years of exclusion from visual records created a curious sense of reclamation. "There's one more element I'm curious about," Madeline said as our conversation drew to a close. "Your decision to reveal yourself, as O.J. Winters coincides with your second novel's release. Was that timing deliberate?" "It was," I confirmed. "The Silent Season explores themes of revelation and recognition, characters discovering truths about themselves and others that transform their understanding of shared history. It felt appropriate to align my personal revelation with those fictional explorations." After Madeline and the photographer departed, promising the feature would appear in Sunday's edition, I sat in my writing space feeling a complex mixture of vulnerability and liberation. For years, I had kept my writing separate from my family, identity, creating necessary boundaries between creative expression and personal history. Now those boundaries were becoming more permeable, allowing integration without erasing distinction. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Daniel said the NYT people were at your place today. How did it go? Also, I finished your manuscript last night. Thanks for trusting me with it." The scene where Mariana discovers her mother kept all her childhood drawings while publicly dismissing her artistic talent. I cried. "Did Mom really keep your publications like that?" The question reminded me how quickly new information was changing our family's understanding of our shared history. "Yes," I replied, "in a file in her desk all these years. We're still figuring out what that means." Emma's response came quickly. "It means our family story is more complicated than any of us knew. Maybe we've all been in different books, thinking we were reading the same one." The metaphor was surprisingly insightful coming from my fashion-conscious sister who had once dismissed reading as something people do when they're bored with real life. Perhaps she had been developing her own depth while I was assuming its absence, another reminder that seeing goes both ways in families. Later that afternoon, my agent called with unexpected news. "The film rights to The Winter Station are generating serious interest," Caroline announced without preamble. "Two major studios and several independent production companies have made inquiries. They're particularly drawn to the family narrative, the protagonist's journey towards self-validation independent of parental approval. The possibility of my story, both its fictional manifestation and the personal experiences that informed it, reaching an even wider audience, created a momentary wave of apprehension. How much control would I have over the adaptation?" I asked. "That depends on the deal we negotiate," Caroline explained. "But Olivia, this represents an extraordinary opportunity, not just financially, but in terms of expanding your audience. The right adaptation could introduce your work to people who might never pick up a literary novel." "I understand the opportunity," I assured her. "I just need to consider the implications carefully. This story draws from personal experience, in ways that affect not just me but my family." After we hung up, I sat by the window watching sailboats navigate the spring breeze across the lake. Each vessel charted its course through the same waters but followed unique trajectories based on individual choices and responses to changing conditions. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. For years, I had navigated my creative journey in relative privacy, protected by both my pen name and my family's disinterest in my writing career. Now that privacy was giving way to public visibility, creating both opportunity and vulnerability, the film rights question crystallized a fundamental choice I needed to make. Would I continue treating my writing and my family history as separate narratives, maintaining protective boundaries between them? Or would I embrace the integration that seemed increasingly inevitable as my professional success made my personal story a matter of public interest? My phone rang again, my father this time. "Olivia," he began without greeting, his tone unusually hesitant. "I wanted to let you know that I finished your book last night." I waited, giving him space to continue. "The father character, Harrison, he said after a moment. I recognized myself in ways that were uncomfortable but illuminating, particularly the scene where he dismisses his daughter's art show without attending, then later secretly purchases one of her paintings through a gallery. That fictional moment had indeed been inspired by a real experience. My father had declined to attend my first published short story reading at a local bookstore, claiming a business commitment. I'd later discovered he had asked his assistant to go and purchase a signed copy, which I'd never seen displayed but apparently still existed somewhere. Fiction allows exploration of emotional truths that might be difficult to address directly, I said, echoing our earlier conversation. Yes, he agreed, but it also creates the possibility for understanding those truths differently. He paused. I've been thinking about what you said regarding conditional acceptance. Validation dependent, on achievement rather than inherent worth. And, I prompted when he didn't continue. And I'm beginning to recognize that pattern in my own upbringing, he admitted. My father measured value entirely by observable metrics, grades, trophies, income. I internalized that measurement system so completely that I never questioned its application to my own children. This acknowledgement of generational patterns represented unprecedented self-reflection from Edward Chen, who had always presented his parenting approach as deliberate wisdom rather than inherited limitation. Understanding patterns is the first step toward changing them, I observed. So it seems, he agreed. Which brings me to the reason for my call. The family portrait is scheduled for Saturday, but I've been thinking about what you said regarding visibility not contingent on conformity. Would you consider an addition to our plans? What kind of addition? I asked cautiously. Your mother mentioned bringing her file of your publications to incorporate into the portrait. I'd like to go further, to create not just a single photograph but a visual narrative that acknowledges both our past patterns and our commitment to a different future. The suggestion was so unexpected, so contrary to my father's usual preference for polished presentations over messy authenticity, that for a moment I thought I'd misunderstood. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. A series of photographs, he explained, beginning with the existing family portraits where you were excluded or marginalized, continuing through your grandmother's album documenting your writing journey, and culminating in new images that show our family as it actually is: complex, evolving, imperfect, but connected. You want to document the erasure as well as the inclusion? I clarified, still processing this radical departure from my father's lifelong commitment to presenting only perfect narratives. I want to acknowledge the truth, he said simply. Not to punish ourselves or you, but because authentic connection requires honesty about both past failures and future intentions. As we concluded our call, I felt a shifting in my understanding of what was possible within our family dynamics. The father, who had once demanded perfection in all family presentations, was now proposing documentation of failure and growth. The mother, who had curated family images to exclude what didn't fit her definition of success, was now willing to bring hidden records into the light. These changes didn't erase the pain of past exclusion or guarantee perfect understanding moving forward, but they suggested capacity for evolution that I hadn't believed possible. Growth not contingent on my success, but emerging from genuine recognition of how conditional acceptance had damaged authentic connection. Later that evening, as I worked on final revisions to The Silent Season, I found myself approaching certain passages with fresh insight. The novel's exploration of hidden truths and revised understanding seemed to mirror my own evolving family narrative in ways both unexpected and illuminating. In fiction, as in life, the most compelling stories weren't those with villains decisively vanquished or heroes unambiguously triumphant. They were those that acknowledged the complexity of human connection, the capacity for both harm and healing, both blindness and evolving vision, both erasure and the courage to become visible in authentic truth. The decision about film rights still awaited resolution. The family portrait on Saturday would test our commitment to this new approach to visibility. The Times profile on Sunday would establish a public narrative around my identity as both O.J. Winters and Olivia Chen. Each represented a choice about integration versus separation, vulnerability versus protection, private truth versus public story. But underlying all these specific decisions was a fundamental shift in perspective. Recognition that my worth existed independent of either family validation or public recognition. I had become visible to myself long before bestseller lists or media profiles confirmed that visibility to others. That self-defined worth would remain the foundation of whatever choices lay ahead. As night fell over Chicago, I closed my laptop and moved to the window where Lake Michigan reflected countless lights from the shoreline. Each point of illumination contributed to the shimmering pattern visible from my writing nook, separate sources creating collective brilliance, distinct yet interconnected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in balancing integration with boundaries, vulnerability with discernment. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary where invisible stories had become visible books, I recognized that the journey from exclusion to inclusion had given me something invaluable. Not just success as conventionally defined, but the deeper achievement of authentic voice and self-defined purpose. That was a success worth documenting, worth sharing, worth celebrating. Not because others finally recognized its value, but because I had never stopped believing in that value even when no camera captured its development, no family portrait preserved its emergence, no external validation confirmed its worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.